So we were talking the other day about, some of the challenges that these kind of Fortune 2000, these large enterprises have in terms of developer experience in training developers. And in your experience, what have you seen out there?
Well, what you see in these large organizations that they use all these different products by different vendors, and each of those vendors they will train you on their product, how to use it and how to implement it. But what you see at these big vendors is that they have these different combinations of all these tool stacks or technologies. And to really train people on how to use the combination, that's something that nobody ever does.
Hmm.
So how do you use AWS in combination with Datadog in combination with Kubernetes? That might sound like an obvious thing, but
Right.
everyone has their own specific implementation, right?
Right. And so and what do you see organizations today trying to solve it? Like, how do a large organization try to solve this problem of like training and education and upskilling?
I think that they take multiple approaches. One is, of course, use the vendor supply training. Another one is leverage all the great content that's available on Udemy, on Pluralsight, on all those big training providers. Of course, there's a big part in organizational knowledge captured in documentation, wikis, pairing sessions, and that kind of stuff.
Right.
But what find is really lacking is how do we do it from a broader perspective? So how do we implement the software delivery lifecycle, and how do I actually use it as an engineer?
Yeah. One of the things I like about this topic is that we're not just talking about developer training or developer upskilling, right? We're also talking about the experience of it. Like, how do we keep these folks happy? And they're like, wow, this is a really modern approach to learning
Exactly.
these things. So,
Yeah. No, nobody likes to read documentation or read wiki pages because they're always outdated. They're always yeah. There's always stuff missing.
yeah,
And as an engineer, you don't really learn things by just reading them. You have to do it. You have to experience it. You have to make some mistakes. Maybe you have to, yeah, you have to play around with the technology.
for sure. And I think one of the things experientially that they have to learn is like code promotion as well. There's the actual act of coding, creating solutions, fixing bugs, but then also like promoting through different environments. Have you seen it where like there's that type of training exists in terms of like the different stages of a delivery life cycle?
Maybe not per se in the different stages of the life cycle, but what you often see at these big enterprises is there's a lot of compliance and security or focus on compliance and security,
Right.
and that's typically baked into these environments. But that's also something that you as an engineer you really need to take into account. You cannot just do everything that you want. You have to take into account all these rules and regulations that you need to adhere to. A good example, for instance, when I was a consultant at a local insurance company, they were on their way to adopt AWS and a lot of the features from AWS. And I had some previous experience with AWS, so I thought I know this stuff.
Yeah.
And then I came there and I said, okay, I need a database. So they were using RDS, which is the managed database service from AWS. So I said, okay, I know know this thing. So I said, just give me a database and I'm going to be on my way. But of course, it's not that easy because in a regulated environment, there are all these requirements and extra security features that you need to configure. And
Yeah.
that's something that's really difficult to capture in standard training from AWS or whatnot, because these were very bespoke requirements from this company themselves.
Yeah.
So nobody trains you on these things. This is something
Right.
that the company needs to do, and the knowledge that the company has to basically transfer between all the engineers.
Mm. And it's almost like I would imagine the rules changed as you got closer to production. So in your
Of
development
course,
environment, you were free to do what you needed, but then you had to think about like, okay, what do I need in QA to properly promote this?
of course. The production environment is always the most strict, and in development or in a local machine, you can almost do anything you want.
Yeah.
And the closer you get to production, the more rules and regulations come into play. And ideally, of course, these companies they have basically a similar environment as possible, but that's always it's always difficult. There's always slight or small changes between these environments.
Absolutely. We had a customer at a large logistics organization, and one of the things they did I thought was interesting. So they had their developer training, and it was as hands-on as possible, and they tried to recreate the promotion of code. And then the one interesting thing they inserted in there, they had a security team that actually would audit the person's changes that they were doing. So not from a code-based perspective, but like, did they follow the right process and procedures? So you can see there's a real need for that. Like the operations team in production wants to know, is TJ ready to actually release changes as he thought about all the different pieces?
No, exactly. And do you want to learn that by doing it the first time on production, or do you want to learn that by having an environment available where you can actually practice those steps?
Yeah, exactly. So it seems like I think the key word for me, at least, is context, right? What's the context of my changes, based on the
Yeah.
environment, based on the rules of the organization, those pieces.
No, exactly. Technology doesn't live in isolation. It's always surrounded by other technology, by rules, by compliance features or frameworks. So that's all stuff that you need to take into account.
So what would that look like, for example, then? So I'm a brand new developer. I just joined Acme. They have this modern Instruqt tool that's going to help me with my hands-on. What does my first couple tracks look like? Is that in development? Is that my kind of 101 of Acme?
I think that really depends on what you want to learn and what you need to learn for your day-to-day job. So what we can do with Instruqt is basically provide production-like environments that allow you to train on specific aspects of the software delivery lifecycle. So say you're a new developer and you want to learn something about promoting your software from a staging environment to production, then we can actually have a sandbox environment that mimics that same situation, where you have a piece of software that's running on one environment and needs to be deployed to a second environment and passing all the checks and all the validations that are in place. So then you can really learn about that specific step because that's something that you need to learn as an engineer.
That's interesting too. Is it makes me think of like even people that are upskilling. So maybe you have people at a particular organization, they're modernizing their stack for their particular software. They're moving their application up to the cloud. It sounds like it could be a similar experience for that upskilling employee who says, "Okay, now I need to learn about AWS features, things like that."
Yes, absolutely. I think the way we approach this kind of training is by really making small bite-sized pieces, so you can really learn at the time that you need to learn it. So historically, I've done lots of different trainings. It was always this week-long course where you really dive into a subject, and by the end of the week, you've forgotten what you've done in the first 4 days, right?
Yeah.
So I think I really believe in just-in-time learning with bite-sized pieces of content that really focus on the job at hand.